It's day 4 of stage 6 load shedding and counting. This as national government continues to make promises. Political analyst Dr Ebrahim Harvey believes that President Cyril Ramaphosa has exhausted all the available avenues and failed. Dr Harvey says South Africa's energy crisis will go down as Ramaphosa's biggest weakness and failure. For more on this, I'm joined by none other than political analyst Dr Harvey. Dr Harvey, appreciate your time this afternoon. Has President Cyril Ramaphosa exhausted every avenue possible?
Yeah, well, you must bear in mind that when I penned that piece, and if you look at what it consists of, indicating exactly what you said, that it would probably go down in history as his biggest failure. Look what happened after that piece. I wasn't prepared for that. I mean, NERSA giving Eskom permission for a almost 19% increase, and outrageous that Eskom in the first place could have asked for a 32%. Can you imagine? Mashaba is completely correct. The biggest people at the receiving end and victims in the final analysis of the steep electricity increase coming in the midst of the worst cost of living crisis. In fact, it is the very ANC supporters and members who's going to feel the pinch most and be most affected by this increase. This looks like a ruling party that's on a suicidal mission, honestly. Have you looked at the whole entire public sector and civil society rallying behind opposition to this announcement? I'm telling you, you're going to have firstly a massive legal battle. This thing that it's cast in stone, it cannot be undone, is nonsense. I really would now support civil society rallying behind a campaign, a nationally coordinated campaign, even if it leads to a shutdown. Believe me, I have personally never felt as aggrieved as I do now against the ANC. And I can tell you now, 2024, next year, without a shadow of doubt, they're going to not only lose that election, I don't even think now they're going to make 45. You're looking at 40 to 45, and the biggest beneficiaries is going to be the DA, and in particular the EFF, who I now think will approximate 20% of the vote for the first time. And you're going to have for the first time a national coalition government. The ANC is in such serious trouble. They really understand. Do they realize what they've done in Ramaphosa? How pathetic and squeamish it is for him to have stole the media. My hands are tied. How can you do this? He is kept abreast with this Eskom crisis all along. And don't forget, Zuma put him in charge of the Eskom crisis in the war room in 2014. 8 years later, we're in the worst Eskom crisis ever. Does he not partly bear responsibility? 8 years ago, Zuma put him in charge of the Eskom crisis. What has happened? It's far, far worse than it was when Zuma had put him in charge. No, really, a very terrible blow that the ANC has struck. And ironically, the people who's going to suffer most, besides business and employment creation, is the very historical support base of the ANC, the black working class majority people in the townships who are reeling under the worst socio-economic crisis ever, and now having to bear. What a huge, the inflation rate, you're talking, 7% there around, more than double the inflation rate. It's a killer blow, really, to confidence in the ANC is going to be shattered now completely, and nothing would have contributed to the electoral demise of the ANC in 2024 next year than what it has done now, and the pathetic response of Ramaphosa, who I know now for 40 years, and I can tell you, I've never felt as bad as I do today about him.
Dr. Harvey, if you allow me to come in.
Yes.
In your piece, one of the things you did say is that the President Cyril Ramaphosa has considerable strengths, and you've obviously known him a number of years. I think you also indicated that you had an office across from his at some point.
Yes.
In your walk. What are some of these strengths that you speak of, and how have they manifested in his 5 years, if you will, in office?
Yes, no, they strengths. That's why he went off to Ireland with the peace process there. No, he's a very good negotiator, very good organizer and negotiator, and emphasis is on negotiations. And you can see I think realizing those skills, the ANC got him to be elected as General Secretary, in 1991, 92. But he no doubt has massive strategic skills around negotiation, but you have to ask yourself then what a fundamental contradiction it is if he has those skills, that he has allowed this thing to happen, and to say that his hands have been tied is a miserable and pathetic excuse. He's also had big gains in the anti-corruption crusade, the new dawn that he came to office. He woke up rather too late, but if you look at what's happened over the past 18 months, he's made massive strides against corruption, and you can see the Zondo Commission of Inquiry coming out, etc. And especially why people had hoped that he had secured a second term, because I can assure you if he didn't, the Zondo Commission of Inquiry recommendations would have died out. So there's no time to speak too much. He's got a lot of good qualities, but I'll tell you the worst of his weaknesses has come out, especially in how he has dealt with this. I mean, he's been there all along.
What is that? So what is that weakness?
I think it's a weakness to draw the necessary conclusions as president of the ANC in this country. I mean, this was the black working class hero, the mine workers hero of barely 2-3 decades ago. And in historical terms, it's a mere drop in the ocean.
But Dr. Harvey, let's go back to 2014 and the time that you talk about where former President Jacob Zuma put him in charge of the war room. And the basic purpose of the war room was to deal with the issues of Eskom. 2014 is 9 years ago, right? What does that speak to President Cyril Ramaphosa's ability to deal with the situation of Eskom?
No, he scores very low. Out of 10, you give him 2-3. I mean, really, you would have expected that the skills that he honed and experienced with NUM and then in the ANC, General Secretary, all in all, he would have gathered sufficient experience and skills to deal, especially if you look at who is the historical support base of the ANC, who's going to suffer most. I mean, I don't know, I'll really be honest with you, I was very shocked. I was very shocked that he could say that, his hands are tied. What an insult to injury. I mean, bearing in mind that the worst load-shedding crisis in the history of South Africa, and immediately after I penned that piece, I discovered this thing that he says his hands are tied, and NERSA has pushed through an increase of 19%. Can you imagine? More than double the inflation rate. I mean, really, an unpardonable, travesty of leadership that Ramaphosa in particular, who does people look towards? I mean, if you look at his address to the National Conference in December, I mean, people expected that they leave there with something decisive about getting to grips with the electricity crisis. He hardly spoke about the electric crisis, even the January 8th statement. And there you can see now saying to this country in the worst moment of cost of living crises, when people are struggling to put food on the table, what a massive impact that 90% increase is going to have on the already very low standards of living and very high unprecedented cost of living. Terrible consequences. Well, I didn't think that he would come to terms and tell us that his hands have been tied, knowing the devastating impact it is likely to have on the already, highest cost of living crisis we have faced in the history of this country. It's incredible.
Well, Dr. Harvey, is privatization the way to go for Eskom? Is outside of privatization, do you, in your mind, see another way of dealing with these challenges?
No. I'll tell you, I've penned several columns to answer your question. Whether we like it or not, it doesn't just apply to Eskom. It applies to all state-owned enterprises. Any quest now, any mission, any talk about nationalization, including the formation of a bank, a state bank, has been dealt a severe blow. Anything to do with state ownership and nationalization as a result of what has happened to the SOEs and Eskom in particular has been given a very bad image. I can tell you the state bank that they're envisaging to form or to turn the post office into a state bank is going to start off on a very negative a legacy as a result of what has happened to the SOEs. I wish them the best of luck, but I can tell you, the ANC has dealt a huge blow to any even notion of public ownership, state ownership and control as a result of what has happened, and more especially to Eskom more than any other SOE, because no other SOE has had more massive ramifications and impact on working people and the poor than Eskom has. And who expected that he will say his hands are tied and that he can't do anything about this outrageous 90% electricity increase that's going to hit the very supporters and the ANC members hardest than any other constituency.
Now, Dr. Harvey, just put into perspective for us what you think 2023 is going to look like when we look at issues around labor, for instance. I had a conversation yesterday with COSATU, and one of the issues that we talked about was government only prepared to pay, I think, 3 or 4% wage increase against, for instance, this 18.65% increase and a cost of living, which is, or inflation rather, which is at 7%. So there seems to be no meeting point.
Well, I'll tell you what's going to happen. Did you see what COSATU at their Congress a few months did to Gwedi Mantashe? 2 successive days, refused him angrily to speak. There you have a taste of things to come. You think you go and hear what COSATU has got to say and what the SACP itself will say about this. The ANC has shot itself in the foot yet again, but probably with more serious consequences. I really now expect that the SACP will very likely enter the 2024 elections as an independent force and break the alliance with the ANC. This is this is a hell of a thing that has happened. I don't know if Ramaphosa and the ANC realizes. I think it will push COSATU and the SACP over the tipping point into a resolve, a decisive resolve to enter the 2024 elections independent of the ANC and ultimately against it. It couldn't have chosen a better moment. The ANC is really finished. If you look at what is going on, really, it's just amazing. Who could believe that? How could you? I mean, it's just incredible. And yeah.
Dr. Ebrahim Harvey, appreciate your time, political analyst, speaking to us around those issues around the ANC.